Okay, I'm Jan Ozer. Thank you for coming. This is a session on choosing a cloud encoder. Going to spend a little bit of time on what cloud encoding is, and then I think it neatly divides today into two basic businesses. One is video on demand cloud encoding, and one is live cloud transcoding. So we're probably going to spend the most time on VOD cloud encoding. That's the most established market. It's got the most well-defined entrance. It's been around for 2 or 3 years. And live cloud transcoding, I think, is the most exciting market. We'll cover that, towards the end. So what is cloud encoding? I think everybody pretty much knows this. Somebody either builds their own encoding center and rents it to you. And Encoding.com, they have not only cloud facilities, but they've got their own encoding center that's physical, or they integrate with a cloud computer vendor like Amazon or Microsoft, and they sell the service to you. So the compressors live in the cloud, and then you lease them on some basis that we'll cover in a few minutes to do your encoding in the cloud. The high-level benefits of cloud encoding are lower capital expense, right? You don't have to buy the servers, you don't have to buy the software, and then very elastic scalability. So if you need to encode 10,000 files tomorrow, you can't do that with Sorensen Squeeze in a dual-core computer. On the other hand, you can do that in most cloud facilities. So the two high-level benefits from a VOD perspective are scalability, CapEx cost. There's also, you don't need the encoding knowledge, you don't need this, all the stuff that surrounds the equipment and the software. There are a bunch of different cloud encoding models. You can lease your own cloud and install your encoder in it. So basically, any encoding tool can be a cloud encoder if you install it in a cloud. The biggest market segment is the software as a service. That's where we'll cover all these over the next few slides. Where you upload your files, they encode them and then deliver them to you. There's also a platform as a service, which is what Elemental does, and we'll cover what that is in a moment. So roll your own, do it yourself. This is the, build your own cloud. You lease the cloud facilities as needed. You buy the software, install and manage it. The pros, the benefits of this approach are, you have dedicated resources, right? If you want to encode, you can encode. Those are available. They're not being used by anybody else. They're totally owned by you. You can run it as a virtual VPN, so you're firewalled from outsiders. There's no risk of anybody getting your data or getting to your videos. And you don't have to buy the hardware. You don't have to buy your own physical servers to install the software. The negatives of this approach are you don't have the scalability. You need the technical resources. You have to run it, and you have to buy the software. So I think when you think about cloud encoding, this is a possibility, but I don't think this is what most people think the cloud encoding market is. The bulk of the market entrance in cloud encoding are software as a service, or SaaS. And here the business model is, the service provider makes all the hardware decisions. They contract with Amazon, they contract with Microsoft, and then all you do is upload. They encode the videos for you and send them where you want them. And then pricing is based upon commitment encoding speed for some, like Encoding.com, and whether the file is an SD or an HD file, that's Amazon.com. Vendors that we know and love in this category, Encoding.com, Encoder, and Amazon. And the benefits of this approach is, it's simple, it's easy, and it's usually cheaper than either the do-it-yourself or the platform as a service. The negatives are, and these are negatives, so if you had Elemental here, and their platform as a service, and you had Encoding.com here, and their software as a service, Elemental would say, well, the negatives of the software as a service is you don't have dedicated resources. You're sharing those resources with everybody else. There's no guarantee that if you upload a file, that's going to get encoded right at that very second. So what I did is, part of the research for this and part of the articles that I wrote is I sent a bunch of files up to Encoder, I sent a bunch of files up to Encoding.com, sent a bunch of files up to Amazon, and encoded a bunch of files in Elemental. And the fact of the matter is, the longest I ever had to wait for Encoding.com was like 5 minutes. Who knows what 5 minutes is? Anybody? What takes 5 minutes? That's the time it takes to spin up another server. So if you're like the last file up and Encoding.com says, oops, hold on, you see the waiting, they're spinning up another server to encode your files. So the longest I ever had to wait in all these trials I did was like 5 minutes. Now, if you can't wait 5 minutes sometimes, then you really need to consider a platform as a service. Because if you're a platform as a service, which we'll get to in the next slide, you own the resources. Elemental says, you pay me X thousand dollars a month, and I will reserve these CPU and GPU instances for you. And if you want to pay enough to keep them running all the time, when you upload a file, it will get encoded right then and there. So the software as a service doesn't guarantee that, right? They have service level agreements. They say, well, blah, 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 whatever they are, but they're not, you don't reserve that capacity. You are sharing capacity with other users. Now again, that's Elemental's take on it. They're saying, that's the major negative of a software as a service. It's shared, so you don't have dedicated resources. It's shared, so it's not as secure. Again, that's Element or Encoding.com would have a totally different view on that, right? But that's kind of the platform as a service take. Platform as a service is Elemental. And basically, you reserve, as I said a moment ago, a certain number of CPU and or GPU resources. You pay $2,000 a month. You reserve 3 or 4 GPUs. You decide how often you want them running, how often you want them dormant, and then you pay a fee based on that type of arrangement. When you upload a file, if the instance is running, because you're paying to have it running, the file will start encoding right away. So you control your resources. And those resources are in the context of the VPN, so they're not really shared. So theoretically, your assets are more secure. I'm not picking a side here. I'm not saying Elemental's wrong. I'm just saying, different takes on the different features and benefits of the approaches. The benefits of the platform as a service, resources of yours. And probably the main benefit from Elemental's perspective is you can run your appliances, your hardware appliances, from the same interface as you run your cloud. So if you've got a bunch of Elemental servers and you've got one interface to run them on, and you need additional capacity, maybe on a burst basis, once a month you need to encode 50 files in a day, maybe you don't want to buy another server, you just want to use the cloud. You can control Elemental Cloud from the same interface as you control the hardware. So that's one of the primary benefits of the platform as a service approach. The negative is it's much more expensive. I mean, you can use Encoding.com or Encoder for $30, $40 a month if you're a casual encoder. On the other hand, Elemental says we start in the 4-figure range. You're over $1,000 a month before you really get anywhere. So it's not for the casual user. It's for people who need firm commitment. That they're looking for a service they know they're going to be using a lot of. The other negative is there's more administration. You need to spin up the servers, spin down the servers, manage all that, which you don't have to do with Encoding.com. With Encoding.com, you send in your file, you pay a fee based on gigabytes, they send it back, you're done. When I was doing the Elemental server review, I had 10 instances reserved in my test account. And I would, it'd be Sunday night, and I'd be thinking, gosh, did I shut those off? Because I don't know what it was costing them to run it, but I felt bad because I wasn't using it. So maybe they'll institute some automatic shutdown capabilities, but they don't have those. They're either on or off. To get them off, you got to turn them off. So more administration required for a platform as a service. A couple of other models. This is what I heard from Telestream a few months ago. Not really sure where this is. With Encoding.com and with Zencoder, you contract directly with them. Telestream and their Vantage product is going to do a deal with Amazon where you essentially rent the service from Amazon, not from Telestream. So if you're interested, the other main benefit of the Vantage approach is that you can run the Vantage instances you have in your computer center and your cloud instances from the same interface, just like you can with Elemental. So a little bit of a different model because you're going through Amazon, not going through Telestream. And then how does it work? Basically it works just like YouTube, except you get to choose your own encoding parameters. You upload your files, you choose your profiles, they encode, and then they send the files where you direct them to send them. And then Most of the larger customers use an application programming interface, an API, not a user interface. So Elemental has a very, very well-developed interface because they built that for their appliance-based products. Encoder, on the other extreme, doesn't have any interface. Basically, it's API only. So if you're encoding 15, 20 files a month, you don't want to learn JavaScript, you don't want to learn XML, Encoder's not a good candidate. And then, there's some other, a lot of people in this, a lot of companies in this SaaS space, some have interfaces, some don't. That's one of the first things you need to check. The biggest negative for VOD cloud encoding is the upload time. So, if I've got a 4 gigabyte file in ProRes format, and I've got to upload that to encoding.com, that's going to take, on my connection, it's going to take, 40 minutes to an hour. I can encode that on my local computer in 40 minutes to an hour. So the biggest negative of cloud encoding as I see it is, the upload time for local files. Now there are some applications we'll look at where you're not getting your files locally. So that's not really an issue. The files don't live on your hard drive. They're being uploaded to you by third parties. So you don't really care. They upload them to the cloud service as opposed to you. But the biggest negative for most producers who are encoding their own files is the upload time. And working through the typical workflow, this is the encoding.com interface. You can upload from FTP, from HTTP, from Amazon S3, Rackspace, Azure, Dropbox, Xpera, or direct upload. So you can upload these files from pretty much anywhere. And most of the big cloud encoding services offer high-speed uploading via Xpera, which is an acceleration service. And they also have an API for automated uploading. So you upload your files, you choose your presets. These are the presets in Elemental Cloud. As I said, they are identical to the presets in the appliance. And then, they encode the files and deliver them to wherever you told them to deliver them, which typically is going to be the same places they can retrieve them from. So S3, Azure, Dropbox, FTP, all those are typically available from the distribution side. Who should consider the cloud? I was in Streaming Media Europe a few months ago. The first two examples are from Streaming Media Europe. So HBO decided they wanted to go from US to Scandinavian countries. So they could either buy a whole bunch of new servers to encode the files, or they could just use the cloud. So these are files that were being delivered from Hollywood anyway, so they were going to live in the cloud at some point, so why not send them to a cloud encoding facility, because upload time isn't really a big deal. This is the European Golf Tour. They broadcast the European tour throughout Europe, and then in 1 week, they got the rights to 64 different countries. So it's one feed. They needed to send that to 64 different countries they weren't serving, the day before. So they can either buy a bunch of racks of servers to do that, or they can use Microsoft Azure, basically the infrastructure that Microsoft built for the London Olympics, to do that. So again, they're expanding into a new market. They need massive new encoding capabilities. They can either decide to buy their own servers or use the cloud, and they're using the cloud. In the US, MTV, they get their music videos uploaded to them. These are not living on their servers, at the origination point. Since they're uploading anyway, why should MTV buy the servers to encode them? They can just send them to a cloud encoding facility, encode them there, and then deliver them as necessary. So I think that, the sweet spot is if you've got greatly expanded requirements, or if the clouds don't live on your server, so the upload time isn't a big deal for you anyway. If people are uploading files to you to encode, then the main negative of cloud encoding, which is upload time, doesn't apply. So that's kind of the sweet spot for me. How do I differentiate the contenders? The first thing I do is look at my existing encoding structure. If I have a bunch of Elemental servers, I want to make sure that whatever cloud provider I use is going to be able to integrate all that into a single control interface. If I've got a bunch of Sorensen Squeeze instances or Sorensen Server or Telestream Episode Pro, I don't really care because I'm not going to integrate the two. So number one is, do I need to integrate? Number two, can the cloud encoder access the files where they live? What's the flexibility regarding retrieving the files for encoding? Significantly, Amazon, their elastic encoding service, can only encode files from S3 buckets. So if you don't use S3, you're kind of out of luck from an Amazon perspective. And then on the input side also, does the encoding service offer upload acceleration via Aspera and other technologies and techniques? Can the cloud encoding service accept my input? So if you're producing in ProRes or you're getting a lot of files in ProRes, not all cloud facilities accept ProRes. So that's one of the basics you need to check. Same thing for MPEG-2 transport streams, ProRes, Avid, and RED formats like that. And then particularly on the right-hand side here, a lot of broadcasters are now getting increased requirements for caption-related features. You're going to find those in the high-end cloud encoding services like Encoding.com, Encoder, Elemental. You're not going to see those in Amazon where they weren't when I looked at a month or two ago. So a lot of the newcomers in that business are going to be encoding only. They're going to give you the H.264, the WebM, the HEVC at some point, but they may not do the caption-related capabilities, and they may not provide the DRM capabilities either. So list all the inputs that you have, list all the required outputs, and make sure that everybody that you're considering can handle all of them. Delivery options should be as extensive as the input, and they should also be able to syndicate with either other target platforms like YouTube and the platform, or integrate into your CMS, whether that's WordPress, Joomla, or Drupal. So again, the high-end encoding vendors can integrate with these on an API level. Some of the smaller newcomers may not be able to do that. And then the interface in the API should match the technical capabilities of the user. Again, Encoder, I'm not a programmer, so Encoder actually had to create the scripts for me to test their product. So if I was choosing a cloud encoding vendor for low volume encodes, I wouldn't choose Encoder because they don't have a UI. On the other hand, if you're encoding thousands of files a month, you need an encoding vendor who has a very well-developed API that your programmers like and think they can live with. So, who you are determines which type of cloud encoding vendor you're going to need. Big difference in terms of H.264 encoding controls. Encoding.com and Encoder, you can access all X.264 controls, which are very, very, very extensive. Elemental takes an approach where they just, whether it's their appliance-based service or it's their cloud-based service, you have 3 or 4 very basic H.264 controls. The quality is very good, so I don't think it makes a difference that you don't have access to those controls. But if you like to tweak, you're going to be frustrated with Elemental and some of the other encoding tools. You're going to love Encoding.com and Encoder, but you're not going to like Elemental or Amazon. Again, I don't really think that's significant because I care more about quality. You don't want to tweak just to tweak. If it doesn't deliver additional quality, who cares? And the biggest issue you're going to have when you're comparing cloud encoders is trying to come up with pricing. So Encoding.com prices based upon gigabytes in and out. If you upload a gigabyte file and encode that to 6 iterations, if it's an hour long or 4 hours long or 2 minutes, it doesn't really matter from a pricing perspective. It's gigabytes in, gigabytes out. If you're encoding with Encoder, it's all about minutes. So if you encode, it doesn't matter what you're uploading from a size perspective. So, and then if you're working with Amazon, it's not only minutes, it's whether it's HD or SD. And then if you're working at Elemental, it's how many instances of GPU and CPU are you reserving and what's their uptime. So it's coming up with a way to easily price compare is going to be very, very challenging. The best thing you can do is estimate your usage in gigabytes and minutes. Most of the SaaS vendors do one or the other. It's either gigabytes or minutes. Figure out which plan you're going to use, as we saw here and here. Pricing scales based upon your commitment. You know, if you commit to $7.99 a month, your price per gigabyte drops. Here, if you commit to $2,000 a month, you're at 2 cents a minute. $40 a month, you're at 4 cents a minute. So pricing is going to vary based on commitment. You know, so figure out how much you're encoding, figure out which plan is the most appropriate for you, and then kind of see how close you can get to a price for each service. Not going to be easy, but it should be relatively doable. What about quality? Ran 2 sets of tests. The first time I was reviewing Encoding.com, so I compared Encoding.com's quality to Amazon and Elemental. Elemental Cloud, not the Elemental appliance. Later, I reviewed Elemental Cloud, and I added Encoder to the testing, and I just saw very little difference in overall quality. Everybody says they're the best, but I just didn't see it. And so here's the first set, a little bit of tonal differences, no real qualitative differences. And this is, you know, again, you can download the handout on my website now, and these will be a lot clearer there. This is a ballet sequence, a lot of motion, a lot of detail, very low data rate. These are 720p at 800 kilobits per second, and there's just not a dramatic difference in the quality between the various providers. Same thing here. This is a ballerina dancing across the stage. It's a very difficult panning sequence. And again, we're just not seeing a lot of difference between. Not really surprising, because most of the cloud vendors who are not Elemental use X.264. X.264 is an open source H.264 codec. It's very well developed. It's very well documented. If 10 people implement it, they'll use it the same way. The quality should be very similar. So it's no surprise that the quality between the cloud encoding vendors who are implementing is very similar as well. Elemental uses their own codec, but they've been competing against X.264 for years with their appliance. So they know how to create a codec, and they're going to put out good quality as well. All these companies are reputable. They're all going to say their quality is the best. But I wouldn't select a vendor based on quality, because I don't think there's enough qualitative difference to make a decision based on that. Performance will be a major differentiator, but really, I mean, how many people care? You know, so I ran 3 sets of tests on all 4 providers. I ran a 52-minute test file to 11 presets. Elemental did that in 29 minutes, Encoding.com in 17, Encoder in 23. So we've got a 12-minute difference. I don't know, is that enough to sway you one way or the other? I don't know, some applications yes, some applications no. I wanted to see, this is a 210-minute SD file. I wanted to see how quickly they could process a single file. You can see the numbers here. Amazon really was, and this is the one that would kind of disqualify Amazon, is the performance there was just really startlingly bad. You know, it's pretty early in the day for them. They are a pretty immature company from a cloud encoding perspective, but that was pretty surprising that they were that slow there. And then 6 848 by 480 files, all 45 minutes long or longer, to 11 outputs. This was kind of the how well does the service scale. And this is actually pretty remarkable, because we had one 52-minute file to 11 presets was 29 minutes. 6 848 by 480 files around the same length was only 5 minutes longer. So when we talk about scalability, we're not, I mean, cloud really is scalable. It really is a huge benefit. These same tests run on systems in my office would be in the hours. You know, it would be, I don't have the numbers right here, but I think some equipment-based servers were in the, you know, like running on an HP Z800 or something, a very fast workstation would take 2 or 3 hours to do these same encodes. So cloud encoding can produce scalability once the files are up in the cloud. And then it's, even comparing speed is very, very difficult. You know, so when I did these comparisons, you know, I had all the GPUs available to me running. If I didn't have them running, it would have taken 5 minutes longer because it would have taken 5 minutes to spin them up. So if you want to keep your instances running, you'll get better performance with Elemental. As I said a couple of times, Encoding.com made me wait for 5 minutes before an encoding job started. Encoding.com also has turbo and twin turbo mode, so you have different speeds that you pay different prices for. So I ran all these with, basically as fast as they could encode them. The instances for Elemental were running. Encoding.com didn't delay, and these are the results that I got. But even performance-based comparisons are kind of tough to do. So what do I do? What do I do if I'm making this decision, if I'm choosing a cloud encoder for VOD, video on demand? Question number one is architectural. Do I need it to work with my existing encoding infrastructure? Then it's nuts and bolts stuff like inputs and outputs. Can the vendor retrieve my files, accept the input formats I use, encode to the delivery formats I need, and deliver those files where I need them? All that's very simple stuff. Then it's ID my interface requirements. Do I need a user interface, or am I going to use the API? Let the programmers who will use the API analyze the robustness and the utility of that, and then look at the integration requirements on the back end. Can I integrate this into my digital asset management? Can I integrate this into my content management system? Gather the pricing data we talked about for pricing estimates and try and estimate the pricing. And then all of these companies let you run some trials. You can basically run your own performance trials to the extent you want to do that. So this is the basic workflow I would consider if I was choosing a cloud encoding vendor. Any questions on VOD? Because live is kind of a completely different story. You guys want to stand up and stretch, or anything? Anybody using a live cloud transcoder? Anybody? What are you using? Different. Anybody doing live transcoding? So live transcoding, I drew this really complicated diagram just for you people. So live transcoding is, Teradek is a big sponsor, so I got them in here. You've got a camera doing a shoot, you've got your Teradek cube doing an encode, and it's sending a single stream, in this case a 720p 4 megabit per second stream, into the cloud. And then you've got a cloud transcoding vendor. So transcoding, they're taking that single input and creating multiple iterations from that input. They're re-encoding it. They're not transmixing it. They're re-encoding it into separate iterations. Here we've got 5 files in the flash adaptive group, and we've got 5 files in the HLS adaptive group. So the live cloud transcoding is, I'm going to move. Can I move? So what's the benefit of live cloud transcoding? Number one, instead of needing an encoder that can do 10 streams here, which costs a lot of money, you need an encoder that can produce 1 stream. Okay, and 1 stream, you can do that on a 5-year-old laptop. You can also do it on a Teradek cube. The other benefit, and the one that's most exciting to me, is here you need 4 megabits per second of outbound bandwidth, which is, it's not, pretty much anybody can get that. That's not that challenging anymore. But if you encoded all these files here, you would need 20 megabits per second of outbound bandwidth to get the files out of the building. And that's where things get really expensive. So live VOD encoding, you've got your upload times, a bunch of issues to consider, but this is killer for me. So for example, anybody use YouTube Live? So what YouTube Live does is you send a single file to YouTube Live, and they do live cloud transcoding in their facility, and then they create the typical streams that they distribute for their VOD files. So I was doing 720p at 2.5 megabits per second. they were creating like 7 or 8 iterations of that file, I only needed 2.5 megabits per second of outbound bandwidth, which I have. If I was creating those files in-house, I wouldn't have the bandwidth to get them out of the building. So live cloud transcoding is much more exciting to me because it solves 2 huge problems. One is I don't need a hardware encoder capable of producing 11 streams. 2, I don't need 20 megabits of outbound bandwidth. I think this is a very exciting market. And I think the use cases, we looked at the use cases for or for VOD encoding, and it's, there are some that are pretty compelling. Somebody drops 64 new countries on you to distribute to, yeah, that's cloud encoding. But pretty much anybody who's distributing live can use live cloud transcoding. You'd really be silly not to consider it unless you already have all the facilities you need to do, to do it the traditional way. So what are the business models for live cloud transcoding vendors? You've got your roll your own, which is Wowza Transcoder. So Wowza's, you put an instance of Wowza Transcoder in the cloud, which you can do. You can run it on a daily basis even. And you send the stream in and you distribute the streams as necessary. You've got software as a service. And this is I tested the Encoder service as part of the Brightcode Live service. So Encoder is the only vendor that I tested that's available as a standalone service provider. So you could go to Encoder tomorrow and say, okay, I want to send you a stream and I need you to distribute this to my live streaming server here. They will do that. And in comparison, we're seeing live transcoding as an integrated service. So HeyVision used to offer the same standalone live transcoding capability. Now they've only made that available as part of their larger cloud encoding service. You can't just buy the transcode. You've got to buy the entire product, the integrated service from HeyVision. And that's so I think iStream Planet is doing the same thing. So I'm sure there are some live transcoding vendors beyond Encoder, but I'm not familiar with them at this time. Okay, Akamai is going to come out with that, and I'm sure that's going to be, integrated with their service. So it really is coming down to, who's going to make this available as a standalone service, so that I don't need to use their platform, I don't need to use their CDN. I just want to use my existing servers or I want to send these streams to LiveStream or to, somewhere else. And I don't know where that's going to flesh out. Choosing a live transcoder, the market's pretty new. I've tested YouTube Live, it worked really well. I tested Brightcode Live, that uses Encoder, that worked really well. So, Wowza I think is the obvious choice if you're doing it yourself. They've been around the longest. Their product is very well proven. If you want a third-party service provider's Encoder, I think is the obvious choice. They've been around. They've only been doing it for 3 or 4 months. I mean, this market is very, very new. And then if you're looking at an Akamai or if you're looking at a HeyVision, you've got to base your decision on the entire platform, the entire service they're offering, not just the live transcoding piece. Questions? Okay, we have a microphone up here.
Did you get a chance to look at some of the, by default, branded services, but ones that offer their same core infrastructure as a white label service, like Ustream and Justin TV, things like that?
I have not. Is Ustream doing that now?
I believe they are. I know for a fact that Justin TV does
Justin
live transcoding.
So Justin TV, so that there's, the main live streaming service provider platforms, LiveStream, Ustream, YouTube Live is in there now, Justin TV. YouTube does it. I know Justin started doing it a while ago. I know Ustream and LiveStream were talking about doing it, but I'm not sure if they've gotten there yet. And I have not, I've just looked at the 2 that I mentioned. Any other questions? Can you get the microphone too?
Do you do any comparison with performance or number of bit rates that each service could do, and number of
I'm sorry, could you ask again?
yeah, number of bit rates per encode, like how many different bit rates, HLS, Flash, the different services could provide in real time?
I mean, the tests that I did were the ones, that you see here. So this was 52-minute to 11 different presets.
Okay, I thought that was VOD.
Oh, I'm sorry, the live?
yeah.
So with live, I tested to, with YouTube, you don't have control. They just kind of do what they do. With Brightcove, I use six different encodes. But you don't really see any of that with it. And
Can you specify how many bit rates and renditions you
yeah,
want?
that's what I'm trying to find the Brightcove review. It's never, it really should just come right up, right? Okay, I should have, come on. I'm sorry, it's in, if you find the review on streamingmedia.com, you'll see the interface that they use. There's one other place I can try and find it. Okay, so here's what the service looks like. I don't know how well you guys can see this. I guess I did 5 SD resolutions and 2 HD resolutions. And this covered both Flash and HLS. So this is RTMP, 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 HLS, 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 and RTMP here. You get to, this is their standard offering, and you get to modify these as you would like.
And other than HLS and Flash, is there anything else that you?
That's all they're doing.
Yeah.
HLS and Flash is all they're doing at this time. Can you get that to?
So how does the billing work? I mean, so you get this menu and you say, okay, I want to do this. I want to do this on a specific date. And you fill this out. So you go to these many streams, right? And you give them your credit card number and you uplink at a certain time and you hook up with them, right? And it is ready on your they'll direct it to a certain website that you've embedded this code in.
So Encoder, I looked at the Encoder service as it's bundled with Brightcode because again, I'm not a programmer and I couldn't come up with the script and create the player and do all that stuff. So you should be able to, in the Encoder interface, specify the server, you get the server credentials to send the stream to, you insert the server addresses to send this, for them to deliver the streams to, and you choose the file iterations. With them, you have to do all that in XML, which is kind of, I was really excited about HeyVision. HeyVision had a really interesting user interface with their live cloud transcoding service, but in August, they folded that back into their broader service offering, so it's only available as part of their entire cloud offering. It's not available standalone anymore. But yeah, you give them a credit card, or you make some kind of business arrangement with them, and then they just.
But you're just going to put a link into your site because it's their works are going to figure out whoever links to your site, and if it falls into something, whether it is a iPad or whether it is a desktop, that their service will figure out if they can deliver your live stream to it and configure the right stream to send to it if it falls within what you have paid for.
That's a great question. And I've not looked at their service at that level. With what Brightcove does if you do it within the Brightcove service, is you just embed the player as normal, and the player does the negotiation with the remote. And I'd be just guessing about what Zencoder's live service does.
And do you have any idea what you've committed yourself economically to? I mean, the sense
Oh,
of
yeah,
what
yeah,
you
yeah.
have.
And it's surprisingly affordable. I mean, something like an hour-long show with like 6 outputs for maybe 100 viewers or something is like $100. I mean, they're very transparent with their pricing, and the pricing is just shockingly affordable.
And you can limit it. It cuts off at a certain point.
Well, I mean, that's the big problem, right? You're killed by your success.
Right.
If you have too many people, you can't afford it. But I don't know how they deal with that. You'd have to ask them.
Till your credit goes.
Pardon?
Till your credit runs out. They just keep charging, and then it runs out, and they stop. Yeah.
Well, I'm sure. I don't know. You'd have to ask them. Yeah. And actually, really, what happens, I think, is they don't care about that. Because you're delivering it. It's your bandwidth. They're going to hook you up with with Brightcove, for example, you pay X for the service, and then you pay bandwidth on top of that. So, you're always going to pay for the bandwidth that there's the encoding function that's very discrete. So for for Zencoder, that's the $100 I talked about. They'll create the streams for an hour-long video for 8 iterations for $100. But you deliver it, and you pay for the delivery. Any other questions?
What about asset quality assurance? Simply if, anybody who does compression from day to day over multiple assets has a failure every now and again. When encoding in the cloud or transcoding in the cloud, what happens when a failure occurs? Does the cloud just, whatever service you have, try to regenerate that asset? Are you notified that you have to re-upload it? When failures occur.
No, I get it. We have a gentleman here from Fandor who you talked about that yesterday, right? So the question was, what happens when you have a failure in the cloud? So you.
We use Zen, so I can only speak for that. We've been very, very happy with them. As soon as we have a burp or any other problems with the file, we'll submit it and we get credited for it, and they'll redo it.
Any other questions? Oh, go ahead.
Your analysis that you did was a visual inspection, but I'm curious, can you speak to any quality tools to analyze the output of the encoded files?
I don't. I mean, I really what I do is I input the files into Premiere Pro, and so they're on a timeline, and they're in that little multi-file interface, and I just do visual comparisons. I don't do PSNR or SSIM. I kind of considered it, but sometimes you get a result where one video file has better PSNR ratings but looks noticeably worse. So I just tend to go by eyeballs. And then I do live comparisons looking for visual, like motion artifacts as well.
Are you aware of any such tools?
Aware of any? Yeah, there's a bunch of tools that analyze quality. But again, they typically use metrics like PSNR, signal to noise, and SSIM, and those don't always match what the eye perceives. So there's a fabulous report every year on H.264 codecs put out by the University of Moscow that's almost completely driven by SSIM and PSNR. So there's a lot of people who do that. I just tend to take a different approach. Any other questions?
Transcoding allow you to have a backup?
Say it again.
Did any of the live transcoding vendors allow you to have a backup in addition to the primary?
Interestingly, YouTube does. I'm trying to remember what Brightcove did. That doesn't.
Yeah.
It doesn't.
I talked with Zencoder. You can run a backup, but there's no automatic failover. So if your primary fails, I don't think the backup will start streaming, but like it does with like a traditional Akamai model.
Okay.
But so
I'm
YouTube
not
allows,
aware of- I'm
yeah.
not-
So YouTube, you can run 2 streams, and if one encoder on your end fails, it'll.
I didn't do that, so I didn't test the failover. So I don't have an answer to that question. And again, YouTube is only, it's kind of like an integrated service, right? It's only available for YouTube. YouTube Live, by the way, was fabulous. I mean, it really is. The only negative about YouTube Live is you've got to qualify. It's like a club you can't get into. And I pulled some strings, which is the only way I qualified. But it really does work very, very well. You have to qualify. So the question was, how do you qualify for YouTube Live? I think they don't really define what the metrics are, but I think it's a combination of followers and numbers of videos uploaded and how many views those have. So if you're just starting out, it's very difficult to, and again, I don't do a lot on YouTube. I mean, it's a very, very good service, but I just don't upload a lot of videos. So Telestream created a free version of Wirecast for YouTube use. So I asked Telestream to see if they could get me live credentials, and that's how I got the live credentials. So it's not, the biggest negative of the YouTube service is not everybody can use it, but it really does work well. The question is, does the YouTube service have a limited number of viewers? I didn't hit that limit. I mean, so I wouldn't know, but not that I'm aware of. And that's not how they work, right? I mean, they're a service for, they're the one service in the world who just loves getting more viewers, I think. So I wouldn't think that they would. Any other questions? Okay, it's good drinking. It's 5 o'clock somewhere. Thanks for your attention.